Welcome to Lore of the Rings, where we explore the secret paths of Middle-earth and share the stories Tolkien never told. Before we dive in, take a moment to tell us in the comments where you're tuning in from and whether this tale has found you by day or by night. In the forgotten halls of Numenor, where salt-worn stones remember the glory of men who dared challenge the Valor themselves, there exists a chamber sealed for 3,000 years. No map marks its location. No chronicle names its keeper. Yet within its walls, carved into black stone veiled by dust and shadow, lies a record that scholars of the Third Age would have paid kingdoms to possess. A record that speaks not of conquest or kingship, but of obsession. An obsession so consuming, so ancient that it predates the very forging of the One Ring itself. The inscriptions tell of a metal, not gold, which men hoard in their vanity, not iron, which they beat into swords and chains, but something far more precious, far more dangerous. A metal that catches starlight and holds it prisoner. A metal that whispers promises to those who seek it and delivers nightmares to those who find it. The Dwarves call it Mithril, the silver steel, the true silver, the metal that does not tarnish, does not break, does not forget. But there is another name, spoken only in the darkest councils of the ancient world. A name that translates in the crude tongues of mortal men to something far more sinister, the bright chain. For Mithril does not merely adorn, it binds. It binds desire to ambition. It binds ambition to power. And power, as the wise have long known, binds the soul to shadow. High in the mountains of Khazad-dûm, in the deepest shafts where even Durin's folk feared to delve, veins of mithril gleam in absolute darkness. They pulse with an inner radiance as though the mountain itself dreams of starlight. But dreams can be deceiving, for where mithril sleeps, watchers stir. Where it glows, shadows gather. And in those shadows, a presence lingers, patient, calculating, eternal. Sauron the deceiver, Sauron the cruel, lieutenant of Morgoth and architect of the Second Age's greatest terrors. He who would forge the One Ring and bring the free peoples to their knees, harbors a secret that predates even his master's fall. Long before he donned the fair form of Anatar, long before he spoke honeyed words to the smiths of a region, he gazed upon Mithril and knew this was the key. Not to dominion alone, but to immortality of a kind even the Valor could not strip away. Some treasures awaken the darkness, but this darkness was bound to treasure from the moment creation sang its first note. The question that haunts the forbidden archives, the question that echoes through collapsed mines and abandoned forges, is this: what happens when the greatest deceiver in all of Arda becomes obsessed with the one substance he cannot fully control? The answer lies buried beneath mountains, whispered in the language of stone and shadow. And now, after ages of silence, that answer begins to surface. The story of Mithril begins not with greed, but with wonder. In the earliest days of the Second Age, when the world was still healing from the catastrophic wars of the Elder Days, the Dwarves of Durin's line pushed ever deeper into the misty mountains. They were master delvers, patient and proud, and they sought the bones of the earth itself, seeking not mere wealth, but understanding. The mountain was their temple, each shaft a prayer, each vein of ore a sacred text written by Allah the smith, their creator and patron. It was in the 3rd century of that age when Durin, king beneath the mountain, stood before a scene unlike any his people had ever witnessed. The miners who found it had ceased their work, standing in reverent silence before the exposed vein. It ran deep into the mountain's heart, wider than a man's outstretched arms, and it glowed. Not with heat, for it was cold to the touch, not with reflected light, for they had doused their lanterns to test its nature. It glowed with its own luminescence, a soft silver radiance that seemed to breathe with the mountain itself. Durin approached, his hand trembling not from fear, but from recognition. In that moment, he understood that his people had discovered something beyond mere metal. This was a gift from the fundament of the world, a substance that had lain sleeping since the music of the Aenir shaped stone and star into being. When his hammer first struck that vein, the sound that rang forth was unlike any note ever heard in those halls. It was pure, crystalline, eternal, a sound that seemed to harmonize with the very soul of creation. The metal they extracted was impossibly light, stronger than the finest steel, and more beautiful than silver kissed by moonlight. It could be worked with care, shaped into forms both delicate and deadly. A shirt of mithril mail weighed no more than silk but could turn aside the sharpest blade. A helm wrought from it shone like captured starlight, turning arrows and axes alike. Jewelry fashioned from mithril seemed to carry its own gentle radiance, making its wearer appear almost ethereal, as though partly dwelling in both the seen and unseen worlds. But Mithril's true power lay deeper than its physical properties. Those who wore it felt more aware, more alive, more connected to the ancient strength of the earth. It was as though the metal remembered the song that shaped the world and whispered fragments of that melody to those it touched. News of this discovery could not be contained. Within a generation, tales of the wonder metal spread across Middle-earth like wildfire. Elven lords in Lindon sent emissaries bearing gifts of great worth, seeking even a small sample. The kings of men in the south, still building their kingdoms on the ashes of Morgoth's defeat, offered treaties and trade agreements. Even the secretive smiths of distant lands, who guarded their craft with jealous hearts, sent representatives to learn what manner of miracle the dwarves had unearthed. But there was one visitor to Khazad-dûm whose interest ran darker, deeper, and infinitely more patient than all others combined. In the year 500 of the Second Age, a figure appeared at the western gates of the Dwarven kingdom. He bore the seeming of a high elf, fair beyond the measure of Middle-earth, with eyes that held ancient wisdom and a voice like honey poured over gold. He named himself Anatar, the Lord of Gifts, and claimed to be an emissary of the Valor themselves, sent to aid the peoples of Middle-earth in their recovery and growth. To the dwarves, he spoke of the art of forging and the mysteries of stone. He admired their works with what seemed genuine reverence, and offered insights into metallurgy that even their master smiths found valuable. He was patient. He was courteous. He asked for nothing, but his eyes, when they fell upon the mithril veins that laced the deepest halls, betrayed something the dwarves, in their pride, failed to recognize. It was not admiration. It was not even desire in the common sense. It was recognition. Sauron, for this fair visitor, was none other than the greatest of Morgoth's servants, now wearing a mask of benevolence, had seen Mithril before, long before. In the ancient forges of Angband, his fallen master had possessed fragments, gathered at terrible cost from the roots of mountains in ages past. Morgoth had studied it, experimented with it, sought to corrupt it as he corrupted all things. But Mithril had resisted. Its nature was fundamentally opposed to the discord and domination that Morgoth represented. It could not be twisted. It could not be enslaved. But perhaps Sauron reasoned it could be mastered, not through corruption, but through understanding, not through force, but through craft. For Sauron's genius had always exceeded his master's in one crucial respect. Where Morgoth sought to destroy and dominate, Sauron sought to control and perfect. He did not hate creation. He wished to remake it according to his own vision of absolute order. And Mithril, this strange metal that seemed to exist halfway between the physical and spiritual realms, might be the key to achieving that vision. As Annatar lingered in the halls of Khazad-dûm, asking innocent questions and offering helpful suggestions, his mind worked ceaselessly on the problem. How could Mithril be incorporated into works of power? How might its unique properties be harnessed, amplified, directed? What secrets lay buried in the deepest veins, still untouched by dwarven picks? The dwarves, in their confidence, showed him much. Not everything, they were not fools, but enough. Enough for Sauron to begin formulating plans within plans, schemes that would take centuries to unfold but would, he believed, ultimately deliver Mithril into his hands. In a shadowed antechamber, while dwarven lords feasted in the great halls above, Sauron placed his hand upon a small ingot of mithril that lay on a smith's workbench. He closed his eyes, extending his awareness through the metal, reading its fundamental nature as one might read a text. What he discovered both thrilled and frustrated him. Mithril was not merely rare, it was unique. Its creation was tied to specific conditions in the Earth's formation, conditions that could not be replicated. There would never be more than what already existed in the mountain's depths. Worse still, from his perspective, the metal actively resisted certain forms of enchantment. The dark powers that Morgoth had taught him, the binding spells and domination magics, slid off Mithril like water off glass. But there were other forms of power, subtler forms. The craft of making, which was his birthright as one of the Maiar, could still work wonders with this metal. If it could not be corrupted, perhaps it could be channeled. Perhaps items made from mithril could serve as conduits for will and intention in ways that common metals never could. As he stood there in the dim light, his hand resting on that silver-glowing ingot, Sauron whispered words in the black speech, words he was even then beginning to formulate, words that would one day be inscribed in fire upon a ring of gold. He was testing, exploring, learning, and the mithril for just a moment seemed to pulse in response. His eyes snapped open, gleaming with an inner fire that no elf had ever possessed. A smile played at the corners of his fair mouth, a smile that would have sent even the boldest dwarf fleeing in terror had they witnessed it. "Yes," he breathed, so softly that even the stone could barely hear it. "You will be mine, not today, not tomorrow, but you will be mine." Some hands were never meant to touch it, yet he would. Oh, he would. To understand Sauron's obsession with mithril, one must first understand the nature of obsession itself, particularly the obsession of a being who has existed since before the world was made, who has seen empires rise and fall like waves upon a shore, and for whom patience is as natural as breathing is to mortals. Sauron did not desire mithril as a dragon desires gold, with simple, burning greed. Nor did he covet it as men covet power, with the desperate hunger of those who know their time is fleeting. His desire was more profound, more terrible, because it was born of genuine appreciation. He found mithril beautiful. In the privacy of his own thoughts, in the hours when he dropped his fair disguise and allowed himself to exist in his true form, a being of fire and shadow and terrible will, Sauron would contemplate the nature of mithril and feel something almost approaching reverence. It was one of the few things in all of Middle-earth that he had not made, could not make, and could not fully control. It represented a purity of craft and purpose that even he, in all his skill, could only admire. This admiration, however, did not soften his desire to possess it. If anything, it intensified it. For Sauron's mind operated on a principle that would be incomprehensible to lesser beings. He believed that to truly appreciate something, one must control it. Beauty must be ordered. Wonder must be directed. Chaos, even the chaos of natural formation, was an affront to his vision of perfection. And so he studied Mithril with a scholar's eye and a tyrant's heart. In the decades following his first visit to Khazad-dûm, Sauron undertook a campaign of research that spanned the breadth of Middle-earth. Disguised in various forms, he sought out ancient texts and forgotten lore. He questioned elven lore-masters, pretending scholarly interest. He bargained with wandering dwarves who had traveled from distant mountains, seeking any whisper of Mithril deposits elsewhere. What he learned both disappointed and intrigued him. Mithril existed in abundance in only one place, the depths beneath the Dwarves. Small veins had been discovered elsewhere over the ages, fragments in the Grey Mountains, traces in the Erd Luin, but nothing compared to the wealth that lay in the heart of the Misty Mountains. It was as though Allah himself had placed a treasure house there, a gift to his children that could never be replicated or replaced. But Sauron also learned something the dwarves themselves did not know, something buried in texts so old that even elven memories had faded regarding their origin. Mithril's formation was tied to a specific event in the early shaping of the world, a moment when the music of the Aenir achieved perfect harmony, before Melkor's discord introduced the first notes of chaos. In that brief, eternal instant, certain substances came into being that carried within them an echo of that perfect music. Mithril was one such substance. It was, in essence, a physical manifestation of uncorrupted creation. This discovery transformed Sauron's obsession from mere desire into something approaching revelation. If Mithril was indeed a fragment of uncorrupted creation, then it represented everything his former master, Morgoth, had sought to destroy. It was a reminder that beneath all the discord, all the war and suffering and entropy, there remained a fundament of order and beauty that could not be unmade. But Sauron, unlike Morgoth, did not wish to destroy that fundament. He wished to claim it. In a secret forge in the land that would one day be called Mordor, far from prying eyes, Sauron began his experiments. He had acquired samples of Mithril through various means, some through trade, some through theft, some through methods best left unspoken. They were small amounts, barely enough to work with, but sufficient for his purposes. He found that Mithril could be alloyed with other metals, though doing so diluted its unique properties. Pure Mithril resisted all attempts at enchantment that involved domination or corruption, but it readily accepted enchantments of preservation, clarity, and connection. It was as though the metal itself understood the difference between creation and destruction, and would only aid the former. This should have frustrated him. Instead, it fascinated him. Sauron spent years, decades, attempting to understand the metaphysical principles that governed Mithril's nature. He crafted experimental items, a dagger with a Mithril blade, a small ring with Mithril inlay, a pendant of pure Mithril set with a lesser gem. Each piece taught him something new about how the metal interacted with his craft. The dagger, for instance, could not be made to carry a curse or a binding spell, but it could be made to remember. When he imbued it with his will in a specific way, the blade seemed to retain an echo of that intention, becoming sharper, more purposeful, as though it understood its function on a level beyond mere physical form. The ring was more interesting still. Mithril, he discovered, had a peculiar relationship with the unseen world. Items made from it existed more fully in both the seen and unseen realms than objects made from common metals. When he crafted a small mithril ring and wore it, he found that his perception of the spirit world sharpened. Colors in the unseen realm became more vivid. Connections between things became more apparent. This discovery sent a thrill of dark excitement through his being. If mithril could enhance perception of the unseen world, if it could serve as a bridge between physical and spiritual, then it might be the key to a project that had been growing in his mind for centuries. A project that would require metal capable of bearing the weight of his entire will and purpose. A project that would eventually manifest as the Ring of Power. But that lay in the future. For now, in these early centuries of the Second Age, Sauron contented himself with studying, learning, and planning. He hung a mithril pendant in his forge, suspending it from a chain of black iron, and he would stare at it for hours while his mind worked through complex chains of reasoning. The pendant caught the forge light and transformed it, scattering beams of silver radiance across the dark walls. To any observer, it would have appeared that he was simply admiring its beauty. But Sauron was doing something far more sophisticated. He was attempting to think like Mithril, to understand its nature so completely that he could predict how it would behave in any given circumstance. This was the key to his genius. He did not merely study things. He sought to become them in his mind, to see the world from their perspective. And slowly, painstakingly, he began to succeed. He came to understand that mithril was not simply resistant to corruption, it was actively healing. Objects made from it tended to restore things to their proper nature. A mithril blade did not merely cut, it severed false connections and revealed true ones. Armor made from it did not merely protect the body, it reinforced the wearer's true self, making them more fully what they were meant to be. This was why, Sauron realized, Morgoth had never been able to make use of it. His master's entire philosophy had been based on distortion and dissolution. Mithril was antithetical to such purposes. It could not be bent away from its nature. But Sauron's philosophy was different. He did not wish to distort things. He wished to perfect them according to his own vision. And if his vision could be made to align, even partially, with Mithril's inherent nature, if he could convince the metal, through superior craft, that his purposes were purposes of order and perfection rather than domination and control, then perhaps, just perhaps, he could create something that combined the power of Mithril with the binding force of his will. The thought made him smile, a terrible, beautiful smile that had once been the smile of a servant of Allah, before pride and ambition had turned him toward darkness. He gazed at the mithril pendant, hanging in the forge light like a captured star, and whispered words that no one else would hear for another 1,000 years. One ring to rule them all, one ring to find them. One ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them. The mithril pulsed, just once, so faintly that even Sauron almost missed it, but he did not miss it, and his smile widened. Every shard holds a whisper, and some whispers command empires. The dwarves of Khazad-dûm, for all their skill and wisdom, did not immediately recognize the danger that had visited their halls in fair form. How could they? Annatar had been courteous, helpful, and genuinely knowledgeable. His suggestions had improved their smithcraft. His presence had brought no obvious harm. But in the deep places, where even Durin's folk trod carefully, strange things began to occur. Miners working the Mithril veins reported unsettling phenomena. Shadows that moved against the direction of their lamps. Sounds like distant conversation in languages none of them recognized. And occasionally, very occasionally, the Mithril itself would pulse with an unusual intensity, as though responding to something beyond their perception. The mining chiefs dismissed these reports as the natural result of working too long in the deeps. Every dwarf knew that the earth had its moods, its whispers and tremors. The deep mines were always places of both wonder and danger. This was nothing new, but it was new. It was very new indeed. What the dwarves could not see, what perhaps only the Eldar in their wisdom might have perceived, was that Sauron's visit had left a mark on their kingdom. Not a physical mark, not an enchantment in the common sense, but something more subtle, his attention. He had focused his will upon Khazad-dûm and its treasures, and that focus, even at a distance, created a kind of pressure, a weight in the unseen world that sensitive minds might feel as unease or disquiet. And where Sauron's attention fell, his agents inevitably followed. They came in many forms over the years. Some were spies disguised as traveling merchants, bringing fine goods from distant lands and asking casual questions about the mines. Others were scholars, genuinely learned but compromised through various means, ambition, debt, or more sinister forms of influence, who sought the libraries of the dwarven lords. A few were creatures of pure shadow, things that had never been mortal, sent to observe and report on the deepest delving, the richest veins, the strongest guards. Slowly, meticulously, Sauron assembled a complete understanding of Khazad-dûm's defenses and layout. He knew which gates were most heavily guarded and which were merely watched. He knew the patterns of the mining crews, the rotation of the guard, the hidden routes that even most dwarves did not suspect. And most importantly, he knew the location of the richest mithril veins, the mother lodes that ran so deep into the mountain's heart that extracting them would take centuries even with dwarven industry. But Sauron was patient. He could wait centuries. He could wait ages, if necessary. What he could not do was directly assault Khazad-dûm. Even at the height of his power, an open attack on the greatest dwarven kingdom would be folly. The dwarves were too strong, too well defended, and too stubborn to be conquered by force. Moreover, such an attack would draw the attention of the Elves, with whom he still maintained his deception as Anatar. No, force was not the answer. Manipulation, however, was. In the year 750 of the Second Age, a dwarf named Barin Ironseeker, third son of a minor noble house, returned to Khazad-dûm from a trading expedition to the south. He brought with him exquisite samples of southern metalwork and an enthusiasm for new techniques that he was eager to share with the master smiths. He also brought, unknown to himself or anyone else, a subtle contamination, a sliver of Sauron's will, planted in his mind like a seed during a chance encounter with a fair-seeming stranger in a southern city. The contamination did not make Barin evil. It did not even change his fundamental nature. It simply adjusted his priorities, made him slightly more ambitious, slightly more willing to take risks in pursuit of greater glory, slightly more inclined to suggest that perhaps the deepest veins should be explored more aggressively, that perhaps the old restrictions about delving too deep were overly cautious. One contaminated dwarf, of course, could accomplish little. But Barin was not the only one. Over the following decades, Sauron planted similar seeds in dozens of dwarven mines. Miners, merchants, smiths, even a few nobles. None of them knew they were influenced. None of them consciously worked toward Sauron's purposes. They simply pursued their own ambitions and desires, which happened to align with pushing Khazad-dûm toward ever deeper, ever more dangerous mining operations. And deep in his fortress in the south, Sauron watched and waited. The breakthrough came in the year 1200 of the Second Age, when mining operations in the eastern deeps broke through into a previously unknown cavern. The chamber was vast, its ceiling lost in shadows beyond the reach of even the brightest dwarven lamps, and covering its walls, running in veins thicker than a dwarf's body, was Mithril. More Mithril in one place than had ever been seen before. The discovery sent waves of excitement through Khazad-dûm. Durin, who then held the throne, called for a great celebration. The wealth this find represented was beyond calculation. It would secure the kingdom's prosperity for 1,000 generations. It would make Khazad-dûm not merely wealthy, but invincible. But there was a problem that only a few of the oldest and wisest dwarves noticed. The Mithril in this new chamber did not glow with the same pure radiance as the upper veins. Its light was dimmer, colder, and it pulsed irregularly, as though in rhythm with some deep heartbeat of the earth. More disturbing still, when miners touched it, they reported feeling strange sensations: vertigo, disconnection, a sense of vast spaces opening beneath their feet. The mining chiefs conferred in secret. Some argued that these symptoms were simply the effect of exhausted workers and bad air. Others insisted that the chamber should be sealed until its nature could be better understood. The debate might have continued indefinitely had not several influential nobles, including Baron Ironseeker, who had risen high in the decades since his return, argued passionately that to leave such wealth untouched would be a betrayal of their ancestors' legacy. The vote fell in favor of mining. Work in the deep chamber began in earnest, and far to the south, Sauron, who had long since abandoned his disguise as Anator and now ruled openly from his dark throne, laughed. It was not a laugh of triumph, not yet, but it was a laugh of satisfaction. The pieces were moving exactly as he had arranged them, for the chamber the dwarves had discovered was not merely a mithril vein. It was a threshold, a place where the bones of the mountain ran so deep that they touched the ancient depths of the world, where things older than the dwarves, older perhaps than the sun and moon, lay sleeping. And those things, when disturbed, would not simply wake. They would hunger. Sauron had studied the lore of the deep places, the forbidden knowledge that even Morgoth had gathered with caution. He knew that there were entities in the roots of mountains that had never been shaped by the music, that existed in the gaps and silences of creation. They were drawn to certain things: heat, movement, and most powerfully Mithril. They could sense it the way a moth senses flame, and they would come. Oh, they would come. The dwarves, in their pride and their greed which Sauron had so carefully cultivated, were mining their way toward their own doom. They would delve too deep. They would awaken something that no army, no matter how brave or well-armed, could defeat. And when that doom finally arrived, in fire and shadow and terror beyond bearing, Khazad-dûm would fall, and its mithril would lie waiting, unguarded, for whoever was patient enough to claim it. The plan would take nearly 4,000 years to come to fruition. Sauron did not care. He had forever. And mithril, beautiful, incorruptible mithril, was worth waiting for. In a chamber deep beneath the mountains, where no light had ever shone, where the stone itself was black as the void between stars, a presence stirred. It was not yet awake. It would not be fully awake for millennia. But it had been touched by Sauron's will, nudged from its ancient slumber, pointed like an arrow toward a target it did not yet consciously perceive. And in that same chamber, visible only to the eyes of spirits and powers, a thin vein of mithril ran along the ceiling, pulsing slowly, like a heartbeat counting down to an inevitable catastrophe. The deeper the metal sleeps, the greater the power it may grant, or the doom it may deliver. While the dwarves of Khazad-dûm delved ever deeper, their minds clouded by ambition that was not entirely their own, Sauron turned his attention to a different application of his mithril obsession, one that would reshape the fate of Middle-earth in ways even he could not fully foresee. War was coming. It had always been coming. The free peoples might pretend at peace, might build their kingdoms and sing their songs of prosperity, but Sauron knew the truth. Peace was merely the absence of visible conflict. True dominion required the elimination of all opposition, and that could only be achieved through overwhelming force applied with perfect precision. But force alone was not enough. Morgoth had commanded vast armies, had wielded weapons of terrible power, and had still been cast down. Sauron would not repeat his master's mistakes. His war would be different. It would be surgical, calculated, and it would be one with tools that his enemies could not counter or even comprehend. Mithril would be central to that victory. In the forges of Mordor, for by now he had claimed that desolate land and bent it to his will, Sauron oversaw the creation of weapons unlike any the world had seen. He could not obtain mithril in the quantities he desired, not yet, but what small amounts he possessed through trade, theft, and ancient hoards proved sufficient for his experiments. He began with blades. A sword with an edge of mithril alloy, forged through techniques that blended the craft of the Maiar with the metallurgical knowledge he had stolen from a dozen cultures. The blade was light as a willow switch, but harder than dragon scale. It sang when swung through air, a note of crystalline clarity that seemed to linger long after the motion ceased. And when it struck armor, even armor of the finest Númenórean steel, it passed through as though cutting silk. But the blade's true power was not physical. Sauron had discovered something remarkable. Mithril weapons, when wielded by those whose will aligned with their purpose, became extensions of that will in ways that common weapons never could. A warrior carrying such a blade fought not merely with muscle and skill, but with intention made manifest. The weapon seemed to know where it needed to be, guided by a unity of purpose between wielder and tool that bordered on the supernatural. This discovery led Sauron to a troubling realization. Mithril enhanced will, but only true will, genuine purpose. A warrior fighting for a cause he believed in, wielding a mithril blade, became far more dangerous than his skill alone would suggest. But a warrior fighting against his nature, forced into battle by fear or compulsion, found no benefit from mithril. The metal rejected false purpose. For Sauron, this was both revelation and limitation. He commanded orcs and men through fear and domination. Such beings would gain nothing from mithril weapons. But his chosen servants, his faithful lieutenants who truly believed in his vision of absolute order, they would become unstoppable. He crafted 9 blades of mithril alloy, each one a masterwork that took decades to complete. 9 blades for 9 captains who would one day receive greater gifts still. Each weapon was unique, designed for its intended bearer. A longsword with a hilt wrapped in black wire, a curved scimitar that gleamed like trapped moonlight, a spear whose point seemed to shimmer between visibility and invisibility, as though existing half in the spirit world. As he worked, he sang. This was a secret known only to himself. Sauron sang while he forged, though his songs were nothing like the joyful hymns of the Eldar or the deep-chested working songs of the Dwarves. His songs were complex mathematical progressions, patterns of sound that described fundamental forces and wove them into the metal itself. They were beautiful in their way, with a cold beauty like that of a perfect crystal or an elegant equation. And the Mithril, despite its resistance to corruption, responded to those songs, not because it was being corrupted, but because Sauron's craft, divorced from his ultimate purposes, was genuinely sublime. He was singing the language of creation itself, and Mithril, that fragment of the music made metal, could not help but resonate with such singing. The blades, when completed, were set aside in a vault carved from black stone and sealed with words of power. They would wait there until they were needed, until the servants worthy of bearing them had been identified and prepared. Sauron gazed upon them one last time before sealing the vault, and he felt something he had not felt in centuries: pride in creation for its own sake, untainted by thoughts of domination or control. The moment passed quickly. He was not, after all, what he had once been. The servant of Allah who had loved creation was buried beneath ages of ambition and darkness. But the flicker of that old joy reminded him of something important. He did not hate beauty. He simply believed it must be his beauty, shaped according to his vision. But weapons were only one application. Armor was another. Sauron had long envied the legendary armor of Numenor, forged by smiths who had learned their craft from the Eldar and perfected it through generations of refinement. Numenorian plate could turn arrows and withstand sword strokes that would shatter lesser protection. But it was heavy, cumbersome, and even the finest examples had vulnerabilities at the joints and connections. Mithril armor would have none of these weaknesses. A full suit crafted from pure mithril would weigh almost nothing, provide perfect protection, and enhance the wearer's presence in both the seen and unseen worlds. Such armor would make its bearer nearly invincible, a walking fortress, impervious to conventional weapons and resistant even to the more subtle attacks of enemy sorcerers. There was only one problem. Sauron did not possess enough mithril to craft such a suit, not even close. This realization drove him to fury. He had collected fragments and small ingots over the centuries, but a full suit of armor would require at least 50 pounds of pure mithril, wealth beyond the reach of even the richest kings. All of that wealth lay buried in Khazad-dûm, guarded by thousands of dwarves who would die before letting their treasure fall into enemy hands. For 3 days and nights, Sauron neither ate nor slept. Not that he required either, but he often indulged in such mortal habits when deep in thought. He paced the battlements of Barad-dûr, which was then still under construction, its dark tower rising slowly toward the sky like a spike driven into the heart of the world. His mind churned through possibilities, discarding dozens of plans as insufficient or too risky. Finally, on the third night, as stars wheeled overhead in patterns he had known since before they were kindled, he stopped pacing. His gaze turned north, toward the misty mountains, invisible beyond the horizon but present in his mind's eye with perfect clarity. He could not take Khazad-dûm by force, but he had already set in motion its fall from within. When the dwarves awoke their ancient doom, and they would, he had ensured it, the halls would be abandoned. The mithril would lie in darkness, guarded only by whatever horror the dwarves had awakened. And Sauron, who had walked in darkness since the elder days, who had served the greatest darkness that ever existed, was not afraid of the deep places. He would wait. He would be patient. And when Khazad-dûm fell, he would be there to claim what remained. The thought pleased him immensely. He returned to his forges and his schemes, content with the long game he was playing. But even as he worked on other projects, the great ring of power that would soon consume his attention, the corruption of Númenor that would take centuries to accomplish, the dream of mithril armor haunted him. In his mind's eye, he saw himself clad in silver steel that caught starlight and transformed it into cold fire. He saw armies falling before him, their weapons shattering against his impenetrable defense. He saw the last kings of men and elves kneeling in despair as they realized no force in Middle-earth could stand against him. It was a beautiful vision, and like all of Sauron's visions, it was rooted in genuine appreciation of craft and order, twisted just enough to serve his darker purposes. In the armory of Barad-dûr, he kept a single mithril chain shirt, obtained through trade from a dwarven merchant who had no idea of the buyer's true identity. It was exquisite work, each ring woven with perfect precision, the whole weighing barely more than a feather. Sauron would sometimes wear it while he worked, not because he needed protection in his own fortress, but because he loved the feel of it, the way it seemed to hum against his skin, resonating with his own spiritual presence. One of his captains, a black Númenorian who had forsaken his people to serve the Dark Lord, once asked why he treasured that shirt so highly when he possessed weapons and artifacts of far greater power. Sauron's answer was simple and terrifying in its sincerity. Because it remembers what creation was meant to be, and I will make all of creation remember. The captain did not understand. How could he? He was mortal, capable of comprehending ambition and cruelty, but not the deep, abiding obsession of a power who had witnessed the world's creation and believed, with absolute conviction, that it had been done wrong. Mithril represented perfection within the current order. Sauron's goal was to become that perfection's master, and through mastery, to remake the order itself. In the deep vaults beneath his tower, he kept detailed sketches and plans. Designs for weapons, armor, fortifications, even architectural elements incorporating mithril. Some were practical, things that could be built if sufficient material ever became available. Others were purely theoretical, exploratory works that pushed the boundaries of what might be possible. One design in particular occupied his thoughts during the darker hours. It was a crown, not a simple circlet or royal diamond, but a complex structure of mithril wires and plates that would encase the wearer's head entirely, connecting at specific points to amplify thought and will. Wearing such a crown, a being of sufficient power could extend their consciousness across vast distances, perceiving all that occurred within their domain and exerting will with the mere force of thought. It was, he realized, a physical manifestation of the dominion he sought to achieve through the One Ring. But where the ring worked through binding and corruption, this crown would work through clarity and connection. It would not force obedience, but would make the wearer's thoughts so clear, so compelling, that resistance would seem irrational, even insane. He never attempted to build it, not because it was impossible. He believed it entirely feasible, given enough mithril, but because he feared it might work too well. There were aspects of his own mind, shadows and memories from his service to Morgoth, that he had carefully compartmentalized and hidden even from himself. A device that brought perfect clarity might illuminate those shadows, and he was not certain he could bear what he might find there. So the design remained a sketch, a beautiful dream locked away in darkness, alongside the 9 blades and countless other works of genius that would never see completion. But the dream did not fade. Every calculation, every scheme, every war he waged had at its heart the same driving obsession: to possess Mithril in quantities sufficient to realize his vision. To become, in both physical and spiritual senses, unbreakable. A single Mithril arrow, loosed from the walls of Barad Dûr, could strike a target 5 miles distant with perfect accuracy. Sauron had tested this personally, loosing such an arrow toward a hillside where a rebellious chieftain had made camp. The arrow had found its target unerringly, passing through leather, bone, and mail as though they were mist. The chieftain had died instantly, his eyes wide with shock, staring at the silver shaft that protruded from his chest. When his warriors found him, they had not seen an assassination. They had seen something impossible, something divine. They abandoned their rebellion immediately, and the stories that spread from that event did more to secure Sauron's power in the region than 10 years of warfare might have accomplished. Even the smallest shard can topple kings, if wielded by the shadowed hand. Yet for all his schemes and plans, for all his careful manipulation of the dwarves toward their doom, Sauron had not accounted for one simple truth. He was not the only power in Middle-earth who recognized Mithril's value, nor was he the only one capable of obsession. The Elves, who had lived through the ancient days and remembered the first rising of the sun, understood what Mithril represented. They had studied it with the same intensity that Sauron had, though toward different ends. Where he sought dominion, they sought preservation. Where he dreamed of conquest, they hoped for protection. And they, too, were not above manipulation when their goals required it. In the hidden realm of Rivendell, Elrond Half-Elven kept a private chamber where none but his most trusted counselors ever entered. In that chamber, locked in a cabinet of dark wood carved with protective runes, lay several objects of immense value. Fragments of Mithril worked into jewelry and small implements, each one a gift from Khazad-dûm during the years when elf and dwarf traded freely. Elrond understood what Sauron had also discovered, that Mithril enhanced the will toward good as much as it resisted corruption toward evil. An elf wearing Mithril jewelry found their natural abilities amplified. Clearer thought, deeper memory, stronger connection to the ancient powers that still lingered in the world. It was subtle, nothing like the overwhelming force that Sauron sought to wield, but for those who understood subtlety, it was powerful indeed. He had spent decades studying the properties of these items, not through destructive experimentation as Sauron had, but through patient observation and communion. Elves did not seek to master the things they valued. They sought to understand them, to learn from them, to exist in harmony with them. What Elrond learned troubled him deeply. Mithril was not merely metal, it was memory. Each piece retained some awareness of where it had been, who had touched it, what purposes it had served. The Mithril in his possession carried memories of the deep mines, of dwarven hammers singing against stone, of the slow, patient formation of the world in ages before even elvish records began. But it also carried darker memories, touches of malice, brief and quickly repelled, but unmistakable. Something with tremendous power had attempted to study Mithril, to bend it toward purposes it inherently resisted. The attempts had failed, but they had left traces, like fingerprints on glass. Elrond knew who that someone was. There was only one power in Middle-earth capable of such subtle, persistent, patient evil. Sauron, who had once walked among them in fair form, who had taught the smiths of Eregion arts they should never have learned, who even now schemed in his dark tower toward ends that would bring ruin to all the free peoples. The question was, what did Sauron want with Mithril? And more importantly, how close was he to getting it? Elrond called a secret council. Not the great councils that would one day be held to debate the fate of the ring, but a small, quiet gathering of those elves who had lived through the First Age and remembered the ancient wars. They met in the chamber where the Mithril was kept, and Elrond shared his findings. The debate that followed lasted 3 days. Some argued that Khazad-dûm should be warned, that the dwarves should be told of Sauron's interest in their treasure. Others countered that the dwarves already knew. How could they not? And that involving themselves might only hasten whatever doom Sauron was plotting. A few suggested that the elves themselves should seek to acquire Mithril from Khazad-dûm, not for hoarding, but to deny it to their enemy. This last suggestion sparked fierce argument. To buy Mithril from the dwarves for the purpose of denying it to Sauron would require vast wealth, and even then might not succeed. The dwarves were not fools, and they would recognize a coordinated effort to corner the market on their most precious resource. Worse, such an attempt might drive them away from friendship with the elves and toward other alliances, toward desperation, toward the very fate that Sauron was likely planning. In the end, Elrond made a decision that he would question for the rest of his ageless life. They would watch, but not act. They would keep their mithril items hidden and safe, study them for any advantage they might provide, and trust that the dwarves' own wisdom and strength would protect them from whatever schemes Sauron had set in motion. It was a decision born of caution and respect for dwarven sovereignty. It was also, as Elrond would later realize, a mistake. But in that moment, surrounded by advisors whose wisdom spanned millennia, it seemed the only reasonable path. They could not save those who did not wish to be saved. They could not protect those who did not believe themselves to be in danger. All they could do was prepare for the aftermath. And so Elrond commissioned a work that would take 50 years to complete. A mithril corselet, sized for a small person, a hobbit, perhaps, or a dwarf child, worked with such skill that it appeared to be simple silver mail to any casual observer. Into this corselet, he and the greatest smiths of Rivendell poured all their knowledge of protective enchantments, healing, and preservation. It would be a gift, he decided, not for the present, but for the future. When the dark times came, and they would come, he had no doubt of that. Such a gift might save a life that was crucial to the fate of all Middle-earth. He did not know who would receive it. He did not know when it would be needed. But he trusted in the patterns of fate that even elves could sometimes perceive, the subtle harmonies that suggested this small act of creation might have significance far beyond its apparent purpose. The corselet was completed in the year 1850 of the Second Age, and Elrond placed it in the same cabinet where the mithril fragments were kept. It glowed there in the darkness, a soft silver radiance that never faded, never diminished, as though fed by some deep source that required neither fire nor fuel. And in that radiance, if one looked very carefully with eyes trained to see such things, one might perceive something remarkable. The mithril was not merely reflecting light. It was generating light, transforming some invisible energy into visible illumination through processes that even elven science could not fully explain. Elrond stood before the cabinet for a long time, contemplating the mystery of mithril and the greater mystery of how such a thing could exist in a world that also contained Mordor, Barad-dûr, and the corrupted will of a fallen Maia who dreamed of dominion. Finally, he spoke, though there was no one present to hear him. Some things remain uncorrupted. Some light endures, even in the deepest darkness. Let this be a reminder. He closed the cabinet and locked it with a key that would not be used again for nearly 3,000 years. But the light behind the lock continued to glow, patient and eternal, waiting for its purpose to be revealed. Some metals demand a price, and some prices claim the soul, but there are also metals that give, that offer themselves freely to those who would preserve rather than dominate, protect rather than conquer. Mithril was such a metal, and therein lay both its power and its tragedy. It could not be truly claimed by those who sought only to take. It could only be received by those willing to serve something greater than themselves. Sauron understood this intellectually, but understanding and acceptance are not the same. He believed that sufficient mastery, sufficient craft, sufficient will could overcome even this limitation. He believed that he could become worthy of Mithril by redefining worthiness itself. It was a beautiful delusion. And like all of Sauron's delusions, it was rooted in a genuine truth twisted just far enough to become a lie. The question that would echo through the ages was this: what happens when an unstoppable obsession meets an uncorruptible object? The answer would take 3,000 years to fully reveal itself. But even in these early days, the shape of that answer was beginning to form, like a prophecy written in silver light on black stone, waiting for eyes wise enough to read it. The centuries turned, as they always do. Kingdoms rose and fell. Mountains wore down grain by grain under wind and rain. And in the depths beneath the misty mountains, the dwarves of Khazad-dûm continued their work, delving ever deeper, following veins of mithril that seemed to lead them like a siren's song toward some ultimate discovery. Sauron's attention during this period was divided. The Great Ring of Power consumed much of his focus, that terrible artifact into which he poured so much of his essence that its loss would one day diminish him beyond recovery. The subjugation of Númenor occupied decades more, a grand and terrible project that culminated in the drowning of an entire civilization beneath the sea. But through it all, through all his schemes and wars and manipulations, one part of his mind remained fixed on Mithril. It was like a constant low note beneath a symphony, not always audible, but always present, giving depth and resonance to everything else. He dreamed of it when he allowed himself to dream, not the troubled nightmares of mortals, but the vast, complex visions of a being whose mind operated on multiple levels simultaneously. In these dreams, he saw himself clothed in mithril that rippled like liquid silver, saw towers built of the wonder metal reaching toward stars that bent to his will, saw a world remade into perfect order with mithril as its foundation. The dreams were intoxicating. They were also, in their way, genuine, not lies or delusions, but visions of what could be if only he possessed sufficient material to work with. This was the tragedy of Sauron's existence. His visions were often genuinely beautiful, genuinely improving upon the base state of things. His methods, however, were monstrous, and his ultimate purpose was domination so complete that it would leave no room for freedom, growth, or the unpredictable beauty that emerges when beings are allowed to choose their own paths. He wanted a perfect world. He simply wanted to be the one who defined perfection. In the year 1697 of the Second Age, when Sauron's armies swept through Eriador and the land ran red with elvish blood, his forces came within sight of Khazad-dûm. His captains, flush with victory and eager to claim the legendary wealth of the Dwarves, begged permission to assault the great gates. Sauron refused. The decision confused his subordinates, who understood only conquest and plunder. Why spare this kingdom, this repository of wealth beyond measure, when it lay vulnerable before them? But Sauron knew what they did not. Khazad-dûm was not vulnerable. It had never been vulnerable. An assault on its gates would cost him tens of thousands of warriors and achieve nothing. The dwarves would retreat into their deep halls, collapse the passages behind them, and wait out any siege with the patience of stone itself. More importantly, such an assault would disrupt his carefully laid plans. The dwarves were mining deeper every year, drawn by ambitions that Sauron had spent centuries cultivating. They were almost deep enough. Almost at the threshold where their picks would strike something older than their own race, something that slept in eternal hunger and darkness. To attack now would warn them, would make them cautious, might even make them abandon the deep mines entirely. No, better to wait. Better to maintain the pressure of fear around their borders, to make them feel that their only security lay in the depths, in the inexhaustible wealth that would fund their defenses and buy alliances. Better to let them damn themselves. So Sauron's armies wheeled away from Khazad-dûm's gates and continued their campaign of destruction elsewhere. The dwarves celebrated their good fortune, attributing it to the strength of their defenses and the Dark Lord's wisdom in not challenging them. They did not know, could not know, that their survival was not mercy or respect, but something far worse: patience. The patience of a predator who knows his prey is walking steadily toward the trap. In the centuries that followed, Sauron's power waxed and waned. He was defeated in the War of the Last Alliance, his body destroyed, his ring taken from him. But even in that defeat, even as his spirit fled toward the east to begin the long, slow process of reconstruction, part of his attention remained fixed on the north, on Khazad-dûm, on Mithril, on the inevitable doom he had set in motion. For Sauron understood something that mortals and even elves sometimes forgot. True power operates on timescales that transcend individual lives or even ages of the world. A plan might take 5,000 years to reach fruition, but if the foundation was properly laid, if the pieces were correctly positioned, then it would unfold with the inevitability of a seed becoming a tree. He had planted his seed in the dwarven mines. He had watered it with carefully cultivated ambition. And now, even in his weakened state, even as he rebuilt himself in the shadows of Dol Guldur, he could feel that seed beginning to sprout. The dwarves were close now, so very close. And when they finally broke through, when they awoke the ancient hunger that dwelt in darkness, when fire and shadow consumed the greatest kingdom of their race and drove them screaming into the sunlight, leaving behind mountains of treasure in abandoned halls, then Sauron would finally have what he had waited nearly 5 millennia to claim. The thought sustained him through centuries of rebuilding. It was a promise he made to himself in the deepest hours, when the pain of his bodiless existence became almost unbearable. The Mithril will be mine. The wait will end. And then, oh, then I will forge wonders that will make the 3 rings seem like children's trinkets. He was patient. He was eternal. And he was, in his own twisted way, an artist who recognized beauty and craftsmanship when he encountered it. Mithril was the ultimate canvas, and Sauron intended to create his masterpiece upon it. Some hunger cannot be sated, and some shadows will never rest. But there are also some obsessions so pure, so absolute, that they transcend the beings who hold them and become forces unto themselves. Forces that shape history, topple kingdoms, and leave marks upon the world that endure long after their creators have passed into darkness. Sauron's obsession with Mithril was such a force. It had begun in wonder and appreciation. It had been refined through study and experimentation. It had been weaponized through manipulation and long-term scheming. And it would ultimately contribute to his downfall, though he could not see it yet. For in his obsession, he had made a critical error. The same error that Morgoth had made before him, the same error that all tyrants eventually make. He believed that everything could be controlled, mastered, dominated through sufficient will and intelligence. But Mithril had been crafted by the music itself, in a moment of perfect harmony before discord entered the world. It remembered that harmony. It was that harmony made physical and enduring, and harmony cannot be commanded. It can only be joined. This was the lesson Sauron would never learn, the truth that eluded him despite all his wisdom and power. Some things respond not to strength, but to surrender. Not to will, but to openness. Not to domination, but to partnership. The dwarves understood this instinctively. So did the elves in their own way. Even mortals, brief as their lives were, sometimes grasped it in moments of grace. But Sauron the admirable, Sauron the deceiver, Sauron who had witnessed the creation of the world and still believed he could improve upon it. He would die without understanding. And his obsession would die with him, leaving behind only ruins, legends, and a scattering of silver-shining metal that remembered better days. In the year 1980 of the Third Age, in the deep places beneath Khazad-dûm, where even the bravest dwarves walked with weapons drawn and hearts afraid, a miner's pick struck something that was not stone. It was not Mithril either, though a vein of that precious metal ran nearby, gleaming in the lamplight like trapped stars. What the pick struck was older, harder, and it was warm. The miner, whose name was Nain and who would never leave the mines alive to tell his tale, dropped his pick and fled. His lantern, abandoned in his terror, continued to burn for several minutes before the growing darkness extinguished it. And in that darkness, something that had slept since the foundation of the world opened its eyes. They burned. Not with fire, though fire would come soon enough, but with hunger, the ancient, terrible hunger of things that exist in the gaps of creation, the silences between the notes of the music. The Balrog had awakened. News of the awakening reached the upper halls within hours. By dawn the next day, it had reached King Nain, great-great-grandson of Durin. By sunset, the first refugees were streaming from the east gate, carrying what treasures they could manage and leaving everything else behind. The fall of Khazad-dûm, when it came swiftly. Not because the dwarves were cowardly. They fought with the ferocity of stone itself, and many great deeds were done in those final days. But because the thing they had awakened was beyond their ability to combat. It was fire and shadow, whip and sword, terror made tangible and rage made incarnate. It was also, though they did not know it, the final piece of a plan laid down millennia earlier by a patient, obsessed enemy who understood that sometimes the best way to conquer a fortress is to convince its defenders to abandon it. Within a month, Khazad-dûm was empty of living dwarves. Within a year, it had acquired a new name, Moria, the Black Pit, where no light shone and no hope remained. And in the deepest halls, where mithril veins gleamed in darkness like frozen lightning, a presence settled in to wait. The Balrog had no interest in mithril. It was a creature of pure destruction, incapable of valuing beauty or craft. But its presence guarded the treasure nonetheless, more effectively than any army could have done. Far to the south, in a dark tower that was still being rebuilt piece by piece, a shadowed figure that was slowly regaining form and strength felt the awakening through the invisible threads of will that connected him to all his ancient schemes. Sauron smiled. It was not a pleasant expression, even by his standards. The trap had sprung. The dwarves had fled. And the greatest repository of Mithril in all of Middle-earth now lay abandoned, guarded only by a creature that Sauron, who had walked in the ancient days, who had studied the lore of such beings, believed he could eventually deal with. Not yet. He was still too weak. The War of the Ring had cost him more than his mortal enemies realized. He would need centuries more to fully recover, and the Balrog was immortal. It could wait. They could both wait. The thought of finally claiming Khazad-dûm's Mithril after 5,000 years of patient scheming filled Sauron with something approaching joy. Dark joy, twisted joy, but joy nonetheless. Soon he would send expeditions into those halls. Soon he would extract the Mithril that had eluded him for so long. Soon he would craft the weapons and armor that his visions had promised. Soon. The metal endures, and so does the shadow it calls. But there was one thing Sauron had not accounted for in his long plans, one variable he had failed to properly consider: the small. Not the small in the sense of weak or insignificant, but the small in the sense of humble, unexpected, overlooked. The small folk who lived in holes in the ground and wanted nothing more than a quiet life and a full pantry. The small company that would one day venture into the dark of Moria, seeking passage to the south. The small hobbit who carried a ring, the ring, and who wore upon his small body a shirt of mithril mail, given freely by Bilbo, who had received it from Thorin, who had found it in a treasury in the deep places of Erebor. That shirt, that small shirt crafted by dwarvish hands in the glory days of Khazad-dûm, would turn aside spear thrusts and arrows that should have killed its wearer. It would protect the ring-bearer through trials that would have destroyed a greater warrior. It would prove, in the end, that Mithril served those who served good, regardless of their size or strength. And Sauron, for all his wisdom and power and patient obsession, would never even know it existed until it was far too late. That, perhaps, is the final irony of his relationship with Mithril. He sought to possess it through domination and control and lost everything. The hobbits, who never sought it and barely understood its value, received its protection freely. Some metals choose their bearers, and some bearers are chosen not for their strength, but for their hearts. Dear listener, this story ends, but many await. Subscribe so no tale escapes you.